Hi, welcome to Rainier View. My name is Jeff. I'm part of the teaching team here. We are continuing our series Multiple Choice. We're looking at the minor prophets in the Bible. Books of the Bible that honestly we probably struggle with reading or understanding, or maybe we've just completely skipped over. But we want to look at these because we believe there's wisdom here. There's some timeless truth that helps us navigate some tricky questions, some difficult situations that we face when it feels like, right, we're a multiple choice test maybe, and all of the options we have to answer those problems or those issues that we face, none of the answers seem right? It's like A, B, C, or D. Can I get E, F, or G? And so we want to look at this because we believe there's wisdom here that helps us navigate those tricky situations where it feels like there's just not a right answer. And one of those issues, one of those areas is money. Because we've all heard the phrase, money can't buy happiness. But I know as Americans, we don't really believe that because stuff don't lie. And storage units in particular don't lie. Let me give you a roundup of some truth bombs when it comes to storage units in the United States. In the past 4 years, the annual revenue has jumped from 39 billion in 2020 all the way to 44.33 billion in 2024. And as of 2024, there are over 52,000 storage facilities in the United States. And the average cost of renting a storage unit is just about $100 a month, meaning you are giving away 100 of your hard-earned dollars to store stuff that you need to get rid of. That's a lot when it adds up. 90% of the self-storage industry exists within the United States, and 65% of all self-storage unit renters have a garage. Okay? It seems like to be an American means that the more stuff that I come upon, the more space that I need, is the song that we might sing. And so now the more stuff we have, the more it distracts us, right? And really, it's not a stuff problem, it's actually a worship problem. Because when our focus is distracted, then we can't worship fully. Our focus, our energy, our mindset is on stuff rather than the giver of all good things for us to enjoy. And so that problem of money and happiness and buying stuff and just that kind of whirlwind of figuring that out, Zephaniah is a minor prophet, and he actually speaks to this. One of the themes of his book is our trust, our pursuit of wealth and stuff over trusting in and worshiping the one true God of the universe. And so as with all the minor prophets, we're not answering every verse, looking at everything. We're taking this one theme and seeing what it has to say to our lives. And so Zephaniah served in the 600s BC. That's when he served as a prophet. And his prophetic ministry actually happened during one of the brighter spots of reform and return of the people to worship God wholeheartedly, to turn from the false idols that they followed during the reign of King Josiah is when this return and reform happened. But that's not what precipitated Zephaniah's ministry and his prophetic words. It was actually what came before that, Josiah's reign, and that would have been the reign of one of Israel's worst kings on record, King Manasseh. This is how the Bible describes his leadership and the way he led people into the worship of these false idols. This is what it says in 2 Kings chapter 21. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 55 years. His mother's name was Hephzibah. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He rebuilt the high places his father Hezekiah had destroyed. He also erected altars to Baal and made an Asherah pole, as Ahab, king of Israel, had done. He bowed down to all the starry hosts and worshipped them. He built altars in the temple of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, "In Jerusalem I will put my name." In the two courts of the temple of the Lord, he built altars to all of the starry hosts. He sacrificed his own son in the fire, practiced divination, sought omens, and consulted mediums and spiritists. He did much evil in the eyes of the Lord, arousing his anger. He took the carved Asherah pole he had made and put it in the temple. Manasseh, king of Judah, has committed these detestable sins. He has done more evil than the Amorites who preceded him and has led Judah into sin with his idols. Now, you might be like, okay, outside of that, sacrificing your son bit, that's not good. But what's the real problem here? What's the big deal? Why are the prophets so spun up about the way that people worshiped back then as it is today? Isn't it just, if we're pure-hearted in our worship and our understanding of God, isn't that all that matters? Right? That same issue is going on for Manasseh as it does for us today. And I want to consider one commentator's insight here. It's a bit more of an academic quote, but I want to read it because I think it really gets to the heart of the issue here. And so Bullock writes this: "The worship of idols violated another critical principle in Old Testament religion. It disregarded the ethical undergirdings of Yahwism, the worship of the one true God, Yahweh. Basic human relationships, defined and guarded by the Pentateuch, were broken down by the Baal cult. Baal's the most common false gods worshipped. The boundaries that secured family ties, especially sexual regulations, were erased by the fertility rites performed in the pagan sanctuaries. The ethical demands of the justice and righteousness, with their implications for the court of law and the marketplace, lose their tenacity within Baalism. Its fundamental moral assumptions were in contradiction to those of the prophetic persuasion. In short, idolatry summed up all that was wrong with Israel." And so if you're like, too long didn't read, can you please translate this for me? Here's the big takeaway. How and what we worship matters. How and what we worship matters. Again, there's a temptation to just think in Manasseh's day, whatever version of God works best for me, that's what I'm going to worship. And so that leads Manasseh to worship a local god. Molech was one of these gods in which child sacrifices were made in times of more extreme distress. And so you might be wondering, why would anybody choose to worship that way? Like, out of any options that they have at their disposal, why that one? Why would anybody do this? But the worship of other gods in Zephaniah's day is based off the same core fear and the same core desires that you and I have today, to chase after comfort and security. We will chase after whatever brings us comfort and whatever brings us security, at least that we perceive in our mind. And stuff and money and wealth often are the first things that we rush to provide security and comfort for ourselves. We might not worship on top of a hillside in Israel to some false idol, but the idolatry that drove people in this time period still drives our human hearts today. We will turn to whatever works to bring us comfort and security. And so Zephaniah makes it clear the danger of trusting in wealth and stuff to provide that. And I'm going to say it this way: Scrooge McDuckin leaves us stuck in a trap. Yes, you did hear me right. Scrooge McDuckin leaves us stuck in a trap. If you remember the iconic 90s cartoon DuckTales with Uncle Scrooge, he had that vault and he would literally jump into the gold coins, and he had his little stripy turn of the century, swim gear on, and he would swim in the tank of gold coins. But I want you to take a closer look at that image. Look at this with me. This really is a trap. This monument that he has built, Uncle Scrooge has built to wealth, is something that continually clamors for more gold, more resources, and more of Uncle Scrooge's focus is on protecting his gold vault of wonders to swim in, okay? And so regardless of what you think of my wordplay around Scrooge McDuck and traps, Zephaniah speaks to this issue that exists within each and every one of our human hearts. Let's look at this from chapter 1, beginning in verse 11. Here's what Zephaniah has to say about our trust in wealth and stuff to gain security and comfort for ourselves. He says, "Wail, you who live in the market district. All your merchants will be wiped out. All who trade with silver will be destroyed. At that time I will search Jerusalem with lamps and punish those who are complacent. who are like wine left on its dregs, who think the Lord will do nothing either good or bad. Their wealth will be plundered, their houses demolished. Though they build houses, they will not live in them. Though they plant vineyards, they will not drink the wine. And a few verses later, it goes on to say in verse 18, neither will their silver nor their gold will be able to save them on the day of the Lord's wrath. In the fire of his jealousy, the whole earth will be consumed, for he will make a sudden end of all who live on the earth. Now, we have to understand that prophetic literature is a specific genre. And so often in prophetic literature, there's hyperbolic language that's used. For example, when a prophet describes the whole earth, the original hearers would have understood that meaning to their specific geographic context. The whole land represented their whole land, their point of reference. And so indeed, we see at times and places throughout the history of God's people, as recorded in the Bible, that he gives them over to the consequences of worshiping gods other than Yahweh. And so because of their idol worship, God actually allows the people to be carried off into exile. The temple is actually destroyed in 586 BC by the Babylonians. It gets rebuilt once they return from that exile. But let's fast forward a bit in the Bible to the Second Temple era in Jesus' day, in the 1st century AD. Here's how Jesus responds when that exact same core idolatry of seeking after wealth and stuff for security, for comfort, for peace for ourselves is happening in the temple in the 1st century. This is what Jesus does and says. Matthew 21, beginning verse 12. Jesus entered the temple courts and drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. It is written, he said to them, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers. And then Jesus goes on in the Gospels to say, oh, and by the way, this temple will be destroyed, which is one of the reasons that the leaders of the nation of Israel in that day wanted to crucify him. And so what comes after? A few decades later, in 70 AD, what Jesus says comes to pass. The temple is destroyed, never to be rebuilt again. And so the outcomes of that are similar to what we see Zephaniah prophesying here. If you are going to put stuff and wealth before and in the place of true and pure worship of the one true God, those consequences are going to come eventually. God will not allow that to continue forever. And so, as I said in a previous message, one of the things that makes the prophets challenging to read is they're kind of cyclical. They repeat things over and over again, patterns, images, even phrases. And in our culture, we're like, boring, give me something new, please. But there's something for us to learn from that. It's been said that history repeats itself, or actually, probably more accurately, history rhymes with itself. And so the prophets teach us that God's desire is for us to see the patterns so that when we experience something in a new context, we can face the same old problems that we see with God's wisdom when we see it in that new context. The problems are not new. The wrapper, the packaging, the context that we face them in might be new, but the problems are ancient, as in trusting in wealth and stuff when only God can truly save us and protect us and comfort us. And so we see this when God talks about the day of the Lord, and Zephaniah picks up on this repeated theme throughout the Bible, but particularly in the prophets. And I said this in a previous sermon. You can go back and catch the one on Joel. But I said this there, that the day of the Lord is good or bad, depending on your perspective. And so a simple way to understand the phrase, the day of the Lord, is simply this. It's a view of God's complete and total victory over the forces of darkness and evil, the complete correction of everything that is wrong and making it right. And we're like, yep, sign me up for that. That's what we want to see happen, right? But the problem is that you and I as people are a mixed bag of darkness and light. And so today I kind of want to expand our understanding of this phrase of the day of the Lord. Because one of the things that happens in the prophets is they kind of, the day of the Lord telescopes out to this future final event, but there's little mini lowercase d day of the Lord's that happen leading up to this final day. But the prophets kind of smush it all together. Like if you open up a telescope and then you shrink it, or if you have a collapsible, drink or bowl or something, right? When the prophets talk about the day of the Lord, they kind of collapse everything together. And so we have to understand that sometimes this phrase is referring to a small moment in a particular point in history or in our own lives, even as there's a big capital D final day of the Lord that is going to come in the future. And so when we face those lowercase d day of the Lord's, those are like wake-up calls to us. To not trust in our wealth, not trust in our stuff, but to trust in the one true God who created it all. It is worthy of our trust and our hope. And the greatest tragedy that could befall us is to miss out on our need for God. That we can go through the difficulty and we don't walk away with a greater awareness of our need for God. And so whether it's a mini day of the Lord or whether it's a bigger earthquake that just rocks you to the foundation of your being and your life is completely upended, we need to understand that when those things happen, it exposes what we trust in. And God is inviting us to learn what it means to trust in Him rather than to trust in our wealth, our money, or our stuff. Look with me a little bit more in Zephaniah chapter 2, the first 3 verses there. We read this: gather yourselves together, you shameful nation, before the decree takes effect and that day passes like windblown chaff, before the Lord's fierce anger comes upon you, before the day of the Lord's wrath comes upon you. Seek the Lord, all you humble of the land, you who do what He commands. Seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you'll be sheltered on the day of the Lord's anger. And so instead of seeking more stuff, what does Zephaniah ask us to do? He asks us to do 3 simple things: seek the Lord, seek righteousness, and seek humility. These are the antidotes to the idolatry in our heart that clamors for our attention like an iPad to a baby at a family dinner out at a restaurant, right? Just capturing our attention completely. And you don't fight that focus on like, no, idol, I'm not going to listen to you. You actually replace that focus by focusing on something else. And God's saying, hey, you change what your focus is by focusing on me, focusing on pursuing righteousness, focusing on humility, rather than trying to say no to an idol under your own power. And for us, often, that wealth, that material stuff and experiences that we chase after. Because we got to displace the room in our hearts with something else. Because Jesus says it this way in the Gospels. He says, it's impossible to serve me and to serve stuff. Matthew 6:24, no one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And that Greek word there for money is in the Greek mammon, which actually probably better translates to stuff in our English language. Back to the storage unit dilemma, right? Let's not be like the people in Zephaniah's day who don't heed the timeless warnings that the prophets encourage us to listen to and consider, as it says in Zephaniah 3, beginning in verse 1. Woe to the city of oppressors, rebellious and defiled. She obeys no one. She accepts no correction. She does not trust in the Lord. She does not draw near to her God. God lets us go our own way sometimes, but He doesn't withhold the consequences of that forever. And furthermore, He makes a way for us to return if and when we are willing. And so as harsh as it sounds, judgment is actually an act of compassion because it brings us to a place where we can truly know and pursue God. C.S. Lewis helps us with this in his book, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which is part of the Chronicles of Narnia series. And so in the book, Eustace is really this sullen, annoying, kind of a bit of a prat kid who's coming along with a couple of the other kids that have been to Narnia before, and he's just cranky and rude. Lucy apparently forgot to charge his iPad before they went through the magical wardrobe door again. But at one point, Eustace's heart is ensnared by this hoard of treasure that he comes upon that was a dragon's hoard of treasure. And so he takes some of it for his own pleasure. And this is the way Lewis describes Eustace. He writes, he had turned into a dragon while asleep, sleeping on a dragon's hoard with greedy, dragonish thoughts in his heart. He had become a dragon himself. But Aslan, the Jesus figure of the stories of the Chronicles of Narnia, he does not abandon Eustace to his own prison of his own greed and selfishness. And he tears away that dragon skin. But the process of this is incredibly painful, in part because it requires the confrontation of Eustace with his own heart. This is how Lewis writes it. Eustace says, I was afraid of his claws, Aslan's claws, I can tell you, but I was pretty nearly desperate now. So I just lay flat down on my back and let him do it. The first tear he made was so deep that I thought it had gone right into my heart. And when he began pulling the skin off, it hurt worse than anything I've ever felt. The only thing that made me able to bear it was just the pleasure of feeling the stuff peel off. You know, if you've ever picked a scab off a sore place, it hurts like Billy, but oh, it is fun to see it coming away. I know exactly what you mean, said Edmund. Well, he peeled the beastly stuff right off, just as I thought I had done it myself the 3 other times, only they hadn't hurt. And there it was, lying on the grass, only ever so much thicker and darker and more knobbly looking than the others had been. And there was I, as smooth and soft as a peeled switch, and smaller than I had been before. Then he caught hold of me. I didn't like that much, for I was very tender underneath now that I had no skin on, and he threw me into the water. It smarted like anything, but only for a moment. After that, it became perfectly delicious, and as soon as I started swimming and splashing, I found that all the pain had gone from my arm. And then I saw why. I had turned into a boy again. And I love the way that Lewis paints this picture of this is how God often meets us, that we have to be willing to allow him to strip away the idolatrous stuff that surrounds our heart. And it's painful to let go of those things. But the question that it poses is, are we willing to let go of the things that we're holding on to that are really bringing us pain and more self-focused, that are changing us into the kind of people that we do not want to become? Are we willing to release our grip so that he can clear away those things and make space in our hearts for us to truly see him, to seek him, to pursue him, to follow him, not just in some ways, but in all ways in our lives? And so if we learn to surrender and submit in that way, renewal will come. I love the way that Zephaniah describes this in chapter 3, beginning in verse 9. Then I will purify the lips of the peoples, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him shoulder to shoulder. From beyond the rivers of Cush, my worshipers, my scattered people will bring me offerings. They will do no wrong, they will tell no lies, a deceitful tongue will not be found in their mouths. They will eat and lie down, and no one will make them afraid. What a glorious promise. Because remember, Scrooge McDuckin leaves us stuck in our ways. It's really a trap when we pursue wealth or experiences or stuff. It's a trap of self-protection of our own making, our own designs. And Zephaniah gives us this picture of why it's worthy to let go of our grip on providing for ourselves or seeking more for ourselves. Because if we learn to not worship at those idols, what's the promise that Zephaniah extends? No one will make them afraid. No one will make them afraid. But Scrooge McDuckin leaves us stuck in a trap of our own making as we pursue our own ability to gain security and comfort for ourselves, rather than understanding that God has us in the palm of his hand. That is the safest, most secure place that we could ever be, regardless of how many zeros follow that one in the bank account. And so Zephaniah's prophetic teaching here can remind us that all our own efforts to secure for ourselves are just one Jenga brick pull away from all of that collapsing, whatever we've built for ourselves. And so how do we pay attention to the idolatry in our hearts? What can we do? And so I'm going to give you something really practical. I'm going to encourage you to do something. What if you learn to pause before your purchases? What if we learn to pause before our purchases, to ask, why do I want this possession? Why do I want this experience? And so here's what I'm going to propose to you. To protect your own heart, would you pause for 10 seconds for any purchase that has 2 digits in it, $10 to $99? Just pause for 10 seconds. For any purchase with 3 digits in it, pause for a full minute. That's any purchase from $100 to $999. Pause for a full minute before making that purchase. For something that is 4 digits and up, $1,000 and up, would you pause for 1 day before making that purchase? Now I hear you right now, but it's a deal. Precisely why we need to learn to pause. Now, exception to this rule with a larger purchase, if you've pre-decided the price range that you're going to spend on that purchase, you've pre-decided it, that's okay. But so much of our purchasing is impulse buying in the moment. And so we need to address the idolatry of our hearts around that by learning to pause. The bigger the purchase, the more time that we need to ask ourselves the question, is this purchase honoring God? Am I being a good steward? Is it causing me to trust in this thing I want to buy, in this experience I want to chase after, right? Or am I truly honoring God with the money he's entrusted to me? And so what we fill our lives with is what we focus on. What we focus on is truly what we worship. Let's learn to be people who pause and think about the connection between our stuff and our wealth and what we truly worship, because we don't want to be trapped by our money, by our wealth, by our pursuit of it, because Scrooge McDuckin leaves us stuck in a trap. And so we unapologetically ask you to commit to what we've committed to here at Rainier View. Would you desire to be a person that is wildly generous with your time, with your abilities, and yes, with your finances? Because if stuff is consuming our focus, our space, our mental energy, we don't actually have a space problem, we have a heart problem. Let's be a people who heed Zephaniah's instructions, his warnings, and his encouragements, to be a people who don't get stuck in idolatry, that we learn to pause before purchasing so that we may truly experience a security and a comfort that exceeds and is so far beyond anything that we can gain for ourselves. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We hope you'll continue with us next week as we continue in our series, Multiple Choice.